Back at it again with another install. Today, we're going to take this BMW 535i and take its CIC generation head unit and upgrade it to BeamerTech's brand new MMI Prime for CIC. It's going to allow this vehicle to have the latest technology. Stick around because you're going to learn exactly what you need to do. Before we get started, here's a recommended list of tools for the job. Definitely pick up your BeamerTech trim removal tool, as it'll protect your interior from getting marred up. We're going to start by going into the trunk of the vehicle and reveal the battery compartment because we're going to need to disconnect the negative terminal. Just grab your 8mm deep socket, loosen it up, and then we're going to pry it off carefully and set it aside. Moving along into the interior, grab your pry tool and we're going to start by prying up this trim panel here. Slowly and carefully working your way over to the passenger side. Once it's loose, pull it out carefully. You'll notice some cables behind it. First, we're going to disconnect the starter cable. Simply pinch it and pull it out. There are two more connectors for the door locks, temperature control, and caution lights. Flip it to the opposing side, and these connectors as well will just simply need to be pinched and pulled. Now we can set that aside for later. Next thing, grab your T20 Torx bit, and we're going to remove the two screws holding in the control panel. Simply give it a good tug, and it should pop out freely. Turn it around, and there's some slide lock pins that you're going to have to loosen up. With one finger, push in the lock, and the other finger, push on the slide. Then it'll pop out freely. Do the same to the other side. Then we're going to put a rag down. This way we don't mar up any surfaces. Then we're going to loosen up these T20 Torx screws as well. This head unit was missing one, so we're going to loosen the one it has. Next, we'll disconnect all the cables in the back of the head unit. Some of the connectors have a slide lock. You simply have to pry it up and then push it in. Sometimes it helps to grab your pry tool and give it a good wiggle so it loosens up. The quadra lock has a couple pins you have to squeeze in order to loosen it up. And with the last two connectors, you simply have to push in the clip and pry the connector loose. Then we'll set this aside for later. Next, we'll remove the rag temporarily. Next, we'll remove the surrounding trim piece for the center armrest button. You should just be able to use your hands and pry it out freely. Go ahead and set that aside. Then again, you guessed it, another T20 Torx screw. Set that aside, and now we can start prying out the main center console area. Starting at the passenger side, then working your way around towards the driver's side. It's a pretty tight fit, so just work your way carefully around. Once it's up, just start disconnecting all the cable connectors that hold it in place. Grab a precision pick tool, as some of these connectors will just need to be freed from its lock pin that's in place. The blue iDrive controller connector will simply pull free, along with these. Next, as we lift it up, there's a cigarette lighter disconnect right here. Simply squeeze it and pull it out. Over here, there's a little lock pin that you have to loosen up to let the slider out. Then the cable for the LED as well. Next on the A pillar, there's a cap that reads airbag. You can use your fingers or a pry tool to remove it. Then, again, T20 torque screw. Set that aside. Now, starting with the weather stripping, we're going to start prying out this A pillar. Once you get towards the center of it, there's two clips. Sometimes when popping it loose, they might slide off. You can see here they're pretty easy to remove. They go back in by just sliding into place. The last connector got left behind, so I'll pry it out and put it back in. Now to get things prepared for the mic. Drop the visor, and there's a hidden screw in this compartment here. Grab your pry tool and set it free. Go ahead and loosen this up. Then it should pop off. A quick pro tip, you can set the screw inside this little compartment and lock it away so it doesn't go missing. Over on the left side, there's a little cap that's covering the screw here. Pop it off and loosen this up as well. If you put some pressure and push the visor towards you, you'll be able to free out the hinge that you can see here. Then you can go ahead and disconnect this cable here using a precision pick tool. And we'll put the screw back so we don't have to worry about finding it later. Moving on to the mic, we'll grab a smaller pry tool and pry on the right side of it, as it has a hinge on the left side. Next, pull out the cable. And we'll grab a precision pick tool and disconnect it here. Then we'll grab the Beamer Tech mic extension cable and plug it into the female side. Now we'll get ready to run this side of the cable. You can see here this is the connector that I'll plug into the OEM mic that'll extend down to the MMI Prime plug-and-play harness. As I've shown you before, one of our veteran installers, Russ, had a genius idea of using an oversized zip tie to run cables through different parts of the vehicle. We'll run it towards the front of the headliner and tape on the extension cable. Giving the cable some support, we'll start feeding it forward. Pulling up all the slack and leaving enough room that'll allow us to connect the microphone into the cable itself. Now that that's good to go, we'll tuck the cable back into place and reinstall the microphone. Good to go. Now to the front of the headliner. We'll continue to run the cable and dressing it in as well, making sure we don't obstruct any airbags. You'll want to dress the cable in along the existing cable path using zip ties. Then just below the A-pillar, there's an access panel that we'll have to loosen up with a pry tool. And we'll run our zip tie down following the same path as the existing cables and pull the slack towards this direction. With two precision pick tools, looking at the different slots on the underside of this cluster, 2 slots in, we'll put our precision pick tools and pry the cluster free. And this is just exactly how it'll feel when you're prying it. So we'll drop this down, allowing us to continue our path over to the head unit. Making sure the cable's not snagging, and pull the excess cable this way. Then we'll continue running this path over and just behind the monitor. Continue pulling out the slack, And then we're going to run the cable down to the head unit compartment area. And we're good to go with that cable. Now we'll put the cluster back into place. Moving on to the BeamerTech iDrive cable, we're going to run the side that plugs into the harness up towards a little hole that's right over here. It's easy enough to grab it with your hands like so. Moving on to the plug-and-play harness, you can see there's a long aux audio cable that we're going to have to run through the same hole, except this time the cable is running the opposite direction. Now you have both cables down into the center console area that we need. Down here we're going to run the iDrive cable on the same side as the iDrive controller. Grabbing the 4-pin female connector and plugging it into the OEM iDrive cable. And the different type of connectors are dependent on your type of iDrive controller. In this case, we'll be using the 4-pin. We'll need to make sure that the iDrive controller cable is tucked just underneath the area of where the cigarette lighter cable will go. Now to run our aux audio cable, this will go on the opposing side of the center console. Just follow the path that I show you here. I'll tuck the excess cable out of the way to make room for the center console when we have to reinstall it. You can see the path that I set here. Just in this part, we're going to want to tuck it in when we have to reinstall the center console. Now we have just enough slack that we need to plug in the aux audio cable into the aux audio port. Remember, just going to tuck in over here, and you can close your armrest to keep it into place. Now we're going to reinstall our center console. So we'll set it into its place temporarily to make sure everything's out of the way, and then start plugging in all the cables that we took out earlier. Starting with the front side. Just go ahead and snap everything into place. Snap it in and slide it into place. Moving on to these connectors, go ahead and plug them back into where you disconnected them earlier. This one will face the front of the car, and this one will face the rear of the car. Next, the 4-pin iDrive controller. And lastly, we have this small 2-pin connector as well. Making sure that all the cables tucked in properly, we'll go ahead and snap the center console back into place. Then, we'll put the T20 torque screw back on that we removed earlier. Snap this trim piece back on, and the center console's done. We'll put our microfiber cloth back down. Taking a look at the OEM Quadra-Lock, there's a fiber optic cable that we have to remove. Grab your precision pick tool and turn it around and look at the top side. There's a simple lock that has to be lifted, which will allow the optic cable to be removed. Grabbing the plug-and-play harness from BeamerTech, we'll put it into the same position on this Quadra-Lock. It'll snap into place easily. We'll go ahead and plug in the OEM Quadra-Lock harness into the plug-and-play BeamerTech harness. Making sure it's loose and all the pins match up correctly. Then push on the slide lock and you're good to go. We'll push that back there and out of the way temporarily as we start connecting some other cables. We'll go ahead and match pin 2 on the plug-and-play harness to the microphone extension that's labeled pin 2 as well. Then with the iDrive controller, it has a cable that's labeled pin 4, and plug that into the pin 4 connector on the plug-and-play harness as well. Now this plug-and-play harness will be ready to be plugged in. For demonstration purposes only, I'm going to show you how things plug into the MMI Prime for CIC, as it's going to be installed into a different location than here. The power cable plugged into the one that's labeled power, with the lock pin facing up. Then we'll plug in the AV USB harness. This cable is expandable to allow you to connect the front and rear camera if need be. We won't be needing it. And it also has a USB 3.0 connector. Next, moving on to the antenna, we're going to plug this in as well. Then the LCD out cable plugs into the LCD out into the MMI Prime. Then the LCD in cable. On the underside, this is a great time to make sure that the dip switches are set according to the right screen size, as it is shown here. With the antenna, there's a little good spot right here that we're going to want to place it. Run it through, pull it out, then we'll remove the cover and stick it into place, giving it a firm press so it doesn't go anywhere. Next, we can go ahead and plug all these back into the head unit. Start with the BeamerTech plug-and-play harness Quadra-Lock, then moving on to reconnecting the rest of the cables. This BeamerTech iDrive head unit cable will plug into the back of the head unit on the pink port. Then the monitor power cable plugs into the LCD out of the MMI Prime cable. Temporarily reconnecting the battery, we'll go ahead and give the system a good test before we put everything back into place, making sure that the external devices is set to aux front. We'll go ahead and plug in an iPhone into the USB port, watching how in seconds it'll automatically connect to the MMI Prime. We got a good audio response from the system, so we're going to make sure that the microphone's working properly as well. Good to go, so we'll go ahead and disconnect our device and battery. This is a good time to dress in all the loose cabling. I went ahead and carefully zip tied the cables that plug into the MMI Prime, and we'll run it up next to the vent area. Then after you remove the T20 Torx screws holding in the iDrive screen, we'll lift the screen out and set it up top here temporarily. Then plug in all the cables to the MMI Prime. And just behind here, there's a perfect little spot that it'll sit in place without moving. Run the cables around the air vents to make sure nothing snags when you put the trim paneling back into place. We'll put our monitor back on. Later on, we'll put the T20 Torx screws on as well. Doing a dry fit, everything seems to go well, so I'll secure all the T20 Torx screws and we can start putting this bad boy back together. I made sure to run the USB cable through the same spot that the antenna was ran, allowing enough slack for it to sit loose just above the center console. Grab your controller and plug that back in. Then you can press it into place and screw it back on. Then we'll grab our last piece of trim and plug everything back in. Now we're good to go, and the installation has been completed. Reconnect your battery, and now you got the newest technology at your fingertips. And if you want to see the quick user guide, check out the link in the description. Was this video helpful? Let us know down in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you soon.